Hello, lovely people. Welcome to Ari Talks About Music. I'm Ari, and today it is time for a review of this new Jill Scott album, To Whom This May Concern. Here we finally have the very long-awaited sixth album from the American singer-songwriter, among many other talents as well, with this actually being her first album in over 10 years, but it's definitely not one that just came out of nowhere, as over the last few years leading up to this album, she has been very active in terms of collaborations and doing live shows as well. And so with all of that, it really was only a matter of time before we did see another full-length album from her. And what a return this album is, with her immediately just being back on form. You never even would have thought that she took such a massive hiatus. There is a hell of a lot to go into on this album, everything from the huge array of genres she uses as influences, and just how well this album flows from track to track, as in a way it almost feels like it should be quite messy and chaotic with how many different styles and genres she uses, but it actually works out incredibly well. And I think that that's really helped by Jill Scott's amazing charisma on nearly every single track, not only just because her vocal delivery is so good and incredibly passionate on many tracks, but also just her very sarcastic and I don't care kind of approach to her lyrics also makes this album incredibly entertaining. I really like how this album opens with Be Great, which already is a song that is very hard to pin down in terms of its genre. The most prominent influence I would say definitely has to be the jazz, which does sound really cool, but there's still a lot else going on, from the soul to the hip-hop influences as well, and of course an absolutely fantastic vocal delivery from Jill Scott herself. And I think that her very versatile vocal style on this track really suits just the absolutely massive range of instruments that can be seen on it. And then I really liked Beautiful People after that, just for how much more simple and stripped back this song is. But despite that, you still have a really funky instrumental, most notably a really cool and very groovy guitar on this song. And even with the vocals being a lot softer on this track, that does not in any way stop her from delivering some really passionate and powerful vocal performances. And then I think that Off the Back continues really well with the much more chill kind of vibe that the album has at this stage, with this one actually having a really nice and dreamy start, which is something that does remain quite consistent throughout the song. And I actually do also really like the much more basic and limited selection of instruments that this track uses, which does just help make it feel a lot more intimate, especially after the previous two tracks did have a lot more going on. I really like the much more rapping kind of style that the vocals have on North Side, with this being pretty much the main feature of the song. I think that the delivery of the vocals on this track is consistently absolutely amazing, both obviously from Jill Scott herself and Tierra Whack being featured on this track too. And then I think that the simple instrumental that this track has is pretty much just everything you would want it to be. It's just about as groovy as it needs to be, providing the song with just a little bit of backbone, while the vocals are definitely more of the main focus. And then next you have Pay You on Tuesday, which definitely is one of the most memorable songs on the album, I will say that, and it does even come with, to be honest, a definitely much needed disclaimer. I'm really in no position to be talking about the lyrics of this track, but you are obviously more than welcome to just go and look them up for yourself and see exactly what I'm talking about. However, looking at this track from more of just a musical perspective, it's definitely one of the most interesting still. I think it's just a really cool track with a super fun vibe, and I especially love the piano that does give it this kind of vocal jazz kind of feel. And in some ways, it does even almost feel like a very kind of classic 50s jazz track, which really does make it stand out on the album, as even many of the other more jazz-leaning songs just don't have that same kind of vibe. And then after that you have Pressure, which I absolutely love for just how chill and relaxed it is, especially coming after a song that's so much more upbeat. The much calmer vocal delivery, I think, is something that this track does incredibly well, as well as the very smooth and super consistent bass line. And on the lyrical side of things, this track is also definitely a highlight, as she talks about the topic of the pressure she faces to publicly display a certain image of herself, even if it goes against how she really is or how she wants to be perceived. BPOTY has some really cool Afro influence, I think, particularly with the percussion style being very reminiscent of that, as well as just the vocals being really fun, a lot of really great and interesting bars on this track that also make it very cool. I think that Me 4 on the whole does just kind of feel like a bit of a throwaway track, to be honest. And especially for an album of this length, being nearly an hour, I really do question this song's inclusion on the track list, as it's not like this song is particularly important for padding out the album's extra length or anything like that. It just kind of exists and is there and is not really anything special and just doesn't really contribute to the album in any meaningful way. But then you have The Math, which I think is just an awesome and actually super atmospheric song, which does take the album in a very different direction, with the main focus of the album's sound until this this point not really being super atmosphere heavy. And I do just really like the much slower vibe of this track, and it is definitely a huge part of the album's very dynamic pacing. And then I think that A Universe is just a fantastic continuation of that kind of vibe. I really like the very subtle jazz influence that this song has, as well as just in general the much wider instrumental palette. And on the vocal side of things, this track is definitely a highlight as well, as I really do think it does deliver some of the softest and most beautiful vocal moments. And then Lifting Me Up does continue the run of much calmer tracks, and I do kind of find this one to be the weakest of the bunch. I still think there are a fair number of individual aspects of the song that I really like, definitely the bass and vocals in particular being at the top of their game. But the song as a whole, I think, does just feel a bit bare and a bit lacking, even though every individual aspect is still well performed. I just think that there does need to be just a little bit more going on in the first place. Good for Nikki, then, I think is just a super cool song, and I love the very serious tone that it has. And also, I think that the bass work on this track is incredible, having such a smooth bass line throughout the whole thing. And of course, the very direct and powerful vocal style is definitely another thing that does make the song a highlight. I love the very flowery style that the instrumentation has on Don't Play, particularly just the very subtle and sparsely used piano, as well as the really nice twinkling effects. But again, I think that the main focus on this song just has to be the absolutely brilliant vocal performances that are given, both just in terms of the power of her vocal delivery and just the very impressive range that she showcases too. To be honest, has some absolutely beautiful string arrangements, and I actually find it to be quite an interesting direction to take the sound in at this stage in the album, as it's just not really a style that until now has really been showcased at all. But despite that, I think that this is a choice that absolutely pays off, and it definitely does make this track another highlight for me. As well as you also have Jid having an absolutely fantastic feature on this song that's just yet another thing that makes it one of my favorites. Right here, right now, I will say I definitely find to be at least one of the most memorable songs on the album, taking a kind of dancey house direction, which is actually really interesting, and I think that the song itself is very good. It just doesn't quite work within the album itself. The idea of just the song on its own is actually really cool, but I think that within an album that is a lot more organic and a lot more like soul and jazz focused, it just doesn't really work all that well. And because of how good this song is individually, I would almost be tempted to say it's the kind of thing that deserves an entire album dedicated to exploring this idea, as a really cool and funky dance track is clearly something that she is capable of. And then for the last couple of tracks, starting with Ashe, it does go back to the much more chill and soft sound that the album has, and I think it really suits it towards the end like that. I love how slow and soft the vocals are on this track, but still managing to give some incredibly passionate performances, which I think really helps contribute to just the very dreamy quality that this track has, as it's one that's very easy to just get lost in its whole atmosphere. And then finally you have Sincerely Do, which I think is just another really nice chill track that wraps the album up incredibly well, both musically and narratively, as it just kind of finishes what Ashe started, and particularly with that incredible piano outro that this track has, that's very short and sweet and almost hard to miss, but I do just love how it gives the album a very satisfying and conclusive ending. And so I think that as much as an album of this quality wasn't necessarily something I expected from Jill Scott, now that it's here, I'm honestly not surprised, as there really were a lot of groundworks being put down over the last few years for an album of this kind of style. And I think that on the whole, she has absolutely killed it, blending elements of jazz and soul and hip-hop absolutely seamlessly, and has definitely managed to create one of the most interesting and dynamic albums of the year so far, as well as just having so many incredible features and, of course, consistently the absolutely brilliant vocal performances that she gives, are all things that come together definitely to make this arguably her best album. And so that is why I'll be giving this album an 8 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching this review. Please be sure to listen to this album yourself and tell me your thoughts below. Please leave a like if you liked the video, and please leave a dislike if you didn't like the video, and remember to stay hydrated.